Imagine this. You wake up one morning and realize you only have one day left to live. Would you still waste it scrolling, procrastinating, or doing nothing? Time never comes back, yet every day we act as if it's unlimited. Time is the most valuable treasure we all possess, yet it is the one we most often ignore. Daniel, a 30-year-old man, lived his days as if they were infinite. He woke up late, scrolled endlessly on his phone, and often told himself, "I'll start tomorrow." Daniel had dreams, big ones. He wanted to write a book, to start a small business, to travel and see the world. But those dreams were always placed on a dusty shelf in his mind. Whenever he thought about them, he whispered the same excuse, "Not today, maybe later." Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Instead of writing, Daniel binge-watched shows late into the night. Instead of learning, he spent hours chatting aimlessly online. And yet, whenever someone asked why he hadn't pursued his goals, he quickly said, "I don't have time." The irony was cruel. He had time, more than enough, but he buried it beneath distractions. Time slipped quietly through his hands like grains of sand, invisible and unstoppable. Deep inside, Daniel sometimes felt a sting of regret. At night, before sleep, he would stare at the ceiling and wonder, what if I had started earlier? What if I had used my time better? But the next day, the cycle repeated. Procrastination became his silent companion. What Daniel didn't realize was that time, this unseen treasure, was not guaranteed. Every second wasted was a piece of his life he could never reclaim. And one day, he would discover just how costly that waste could be. One quiet afternoon, Daniel sat alone on a bench in the park, scrolling endlessly through his phone. He barely noticed the world around him until a frail voice broke the silence. Beside him sat an elderly man, his back slightly bent, his hands trembling. The man glanced at Daniel's phone and smiled faintly. "Careful, son. Time is the only thing you'll never get back." Daniel looked up, surprised. The old man continued, his eyes reflecting both wisdom and sorrow. "When I was your age, I thought I had forever. I always said, 'I'll do it tomorrow.' I postponed my dreams, my plans, even time with my loved ones. And now," he paused, taking a deep breath, "now tomorrow is gone. All I have are regrets." The words struck Daniel like lightning. For the first time, he saw himself in the man's story. Every excuse, every delay, every wasted hour, it was the same path. "Don't make the mistake I made," the old man whispered. "You think you have time, but you don't. Life doesn't wait." Daniel's heart pounded. The noise of the park faded, and all he could hear were those words echoing in his mind. That night, lying awake in his bed, Daniel replayed the encounter again and again. Something inside him stirred, a warning, a wake-up call he could no longer ignore. The next morning, Daniel sat at his desk, staring at his laptop. A new email notification appeared, an offer to join a promising project at work. It was the kind of opportunity that could change his career. But instead of opening the file, Daniel muttered to himself, "I'll check it tonight. I still have time." He pushed the laptop aside and reached for his phone. Hours slipped away in endless scrolling, meaningless conversations, and background noise. By evening, he felt too tired. "Tomorrow," he whispered again, shutting down the computer without reading a single word. The next day, the opportunity was gone. His colleague had taken the project and earned recognition that could have been his. Daniel sat frozen, realizing how quickly chances vanish when we assume they'll always wait. It was then he understood the cruel trap of procrastination, the illusion of tomorrow. Tomorrow feels safe, comfortable, endless, but it's a shadow, never guaranteed. As he replayed the old man's words in his mind, Daniel felt the sting of regret tighten around him. Time had tricked him once again, and he had willingly handed it away. For the first time, Daniel whispered a question he had never dared to ask. What if tomorrow never comes? A few weeks later, Daniel received a call that shook his world. His mother had fallen seriously ill. Rushing to the hospital, he found her lying weakly on the bed, her face pale yet calm. Seeing her fragile state, guilt washed over him. He had often postponed visits, telling himself, "I'll see her next week when I'm less busy." But now time had cornered him. Sitting by her side, Daniel held her hand. His mother smiled faintly, whispering, "Son, life is not as long as you think. Don't waste it." Her words pierced his heart. They were almost identical to what the old man in the park had told him. Only now, they carried a deeper weight. This was his mother, the woman who had given him everything, reminding him of the one thing he kept ignoring. Tears welled in his eyes as he realized how much time he had squandered, time he could have spent with her, time that would never return. That night, sitting in the dim hospital corridor, Daniel made a silent vow. He would no longer be a prisoner of procrastination. He would no longer live as if tomorrow was guaranteed. From that moment on, he would value time, not just for himself, but for the people he loved. This was the turning point. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a fire within him, urging him to change before it was too late. After that night at the hospital, Daniel's life slowly began to change. He woke up earlier, no longer rushing through mornings. Instead of reaching for his phone, he opened a notebook and wrote down the things he wanted to accomplish that day. Small steps, but intentional. He cut down his screen time, deleting apps that drained his hours. At first, it was difficult. His fingers itched to scroll, but he reminded himself of his mother's words. Life is not as long as you think. That reminder kept him grounded. Daniel also began to revisit his long-forgotten dreams. He set aside 1 hour each day to write, slowly building the pages of the book he had once promised himself. Every sentence felt like reclaiming a piece of lost time. He spent more evenings with his family, listening to their stories, laughing at the dinner table. These simple moments, once ignored, became treasures he held dearly. Even at work, people noticed the change. Daniel was more focused, more disciplined, and more present. Instead of delaying tasks, he tackled them head-on. Opportunities that once slipped through his fingers now stayed firmly in his grasp. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel felt alive. Not because he had more hours than before, but because he finally knew how to use them. Time had always been there, waiting. All it needed was purpose. Years passed, and Daniel was no longer the same man who wasted days in endless distraction. His book was finally published, inspiring thousands of readers. At work, he had become a leader known not only for his skills, but also for his discipline and clarity. But above all, he carried with him a deep sense of peace, because he knew he was no longer throwing life away. He often visited his mother's grave, bringing flowers and silently thanking her for the words that had changed everything. Life is not as long as you think. Her reminder lived on in his choices, guiding him every single day. Friends began to notice the difference in him. Some asked, "How did you change so much?" Daniel would smile and answer simply, "I stopped believing in tomorrow I started living today. He realized that legacy was not only about achievements or wealth, it was about moments, relationships, and how one chose to spend the irreplaceable gift of time. Looking back, Daniel felt no bitterness for the years he had wasted. Instead, he saw them as lessons, painful but necessary steps that led him here. And now he used his story to remind others, every second is a seed, capable of growing into regret or into purpose. Standing before a small crowd at a seminar, Daniel closed his speech with the same words that had transformed him. We don't control how much time we have, but we do control how we spend it. Time never comes back, so live today as if it truly matters. The audience fell silent, some with tears in their eyes, for in Daniel's story they saw their own.